Okay, hello everybody, and I'm going to do a screen share here real quick. So this is a diagram that most of you are probably familiar with. This is David Hawkins' levels of consciousness, and I love this. I love this chart, and I love the idea of it, and I love the title of it, the fact that it's a map of consciousness or raising your level of consciousness. Because in Out of the Matrix, we talk so much about this idea of the subconscious mind and bringing what's in the subconscious into the conscious, and that's raising your level of consciousness, which is a phenomenal idea, and it's one of those things that you got to keep practicing. So this is sort of his basic chart, and I'm going to drop that one, and then this is one that somebody put together. I'm not sure Hawkins did, but it's interesting. It's got some added categories here, sort of process, God view, emotion, life view. Some of those are on the other sheet, but they try to put a rate of happiness. You can see the pink stuff is below 200. And remember, David Hawkins says above 200 is where things change dramatically for people. And humanity, and he says in 1984, went from somewhere around, I want to say 175 to 204. And so that was a big jump to move into that sort of middle section there that's sort of an off-white or an off-white sort of color. The far right couple columns are interesting. The percentage of world population. So 78% is living at those lower levels, 18% at that middle level, and a little over 4%, or right around 4%, is living at those highest levels. And then even the section farther to the right there, mentality, victim abuser, self-empowerment, and then self-realization and spiritual. And so I want to keep that's the part of the chart I want to sort of focus in on as we talk about what we're going to talk about tonight. But it's just interesting to kind of, you can peruse through that and look at, where you think you might be at different points in your life and what you're working on. I think most of the people who are doing Out of the Matrix for any length of time are somewhere in the self-empowerment or self-realization section there. The people who are really doing it earnestly anyways, which is most of the people that are showing up regularly on Thursday nights or doing work with us in terms of mentoring. So that said, I'm going to stop the screen share. We're going to come back to this in a little while. Stop the screen share. So I want to talk about a few things. I've been listening to Joe Dispenza quite a bit and doing his meditations quite a bit. And he talked about mixing some different concepts together. And I wanted to talk about some of those different concepts that we mix into Out of the Matrix. So the first one being neuroscience. I hope I'll spell this correctly, neuroscience. So we do that in the section where we talk about being addicted to your emotions. Okay. And we talk about the brain wiring and how your thoughts become your identity, and it gets wired into your brain. And he talks about Dispenza in some of the clips we show. He talks about the fact that what wires together joins together, and what doesn't wire together doesn't join together. And so we're creating our identity all the time with how we think. That's the basic sort of our neuroscience pieces, this idea that we've got neurons that are connecting, and they connect based on what we think about. So when I think of myself as not good enough, and then I view evidence of that as reinforcement of that idea, I'm just reinforcing my identity as not good enough. And this is why we got to get in touch with not good enough, see the falsity of it, and start to see the reality that we are good enough. Okay. And when we start to do that, we're literally neuroscience, neuroplasticity, right? The brain is like plastic, it's moldable. And so we show this video of literally connections being made and connections being broken. So when I see myself as not good enough, I'm reinforcing those connections, those neural connections in my brain, and that's my identity. When I choose not to see myself that way and start to see myself in a different way, I'm literally breaking neural connections and rewiring my identity. All right. So that's sort of the thumbnail sketch of what we do in neuroscience in the weekend. of course, we get into some more detail, and it depends on where we go with that. PSY is just psychology, the psychology of what we're talking about. I'll go with my red here. So we talk about some psychology, and primarily, well, I don't know about primarily, but one of the major tenets is the conscious and subconscious piece that we talk about. Okay, so the science, neuroscience, science of psychology. Okay, conscious, subconscious. I've got my snowmen that we do. We've got the iceberg that we do, and then also in psychology, we talk a lot about. We don't directly say it this way, but we call it talk. We're really talking about self-talk. What I say about myself, how I view the world, what is my internal dialogue, and metacognition. You know, you've all heard a lot about metacognition. Hopefully, anyways. We didn't talk about this a lot in weekends, but recently, over recent years, I've been talking about that to make sure we've got everybody on board. We do. So metacognition, of course, is that idea that we're thinking about our thoughts. Why am I having this thought? What's the cause of this thought? Rather than most people just have their thoughts, they don't think at all about why am I having the thought. Okay, so metacognition, and then we do things like the reality check. We do your story and victim land. And honestly, those are all pieces of psychology that we're looking at about the way we think about ourselves. Victim land, you know, do we see ourselves as a victim? And do we have that sort of a mentality? Or are we seeing ourselves as a horror, or as a hero, or as a villain? And how is that played out? And the choices that we have about this. Really, the big concept that comes out from this psychological piece that we're covering is choice. We have a choice of how we handle our internal dialogue. We have a choice of how we see the world. We have all kinds of choices, and most of us don't recognize that because we're being driven by our subconscious thinking. So we don't recognize the choices that we actually have on a conscious level. And so this relates to David Hawkins in the sense that we're becoming a more conscious person. We're raising our level of consciousness. That's what's happening. Okay. So we've got neuroscience, we've got psychology as a science. We move over here, and then we've got quantum mechanics. Okay. And in quantum mechanics, we talk about in the weekend. Entanglement. Let me see if I can write quantum mechanics up here. Quantum mechanics. And again, the big piece that we do in quantum mechanics is just the idea that, well, we talk about the law of attraction, right? Which I heard somebody recently reframe that as the law of resonance. The law of resonance. In other words, yes, we attract things to each other, but we attract things to ourselves based on the resonance that we have. In other words, if I have a not good enough resonance, then I'm going to draw not good enough stuff into my life. So they're calling it the law of resonance, which I really like, because then it's not about, you know, I'm trying to attract things into my life. It's literally my thinking draws these things to me. And so I got to think about what I want to resonate towards me. But quantum mechanics, also we get into entanglement. I'll abbreviate that as ENTG, entanglement. Okay. And this is the section that's power of your mind, right? We're helping you understand on a quantum mechanical level how powerful your thinking is, how powerful your mind is, and that it's affecting everything that shows up in your life through the law of resonance, law of attraction, entanglement, and also just the effects that it has on you physically. We do a lot of those videos about the milkshakes or the rice or the water, so that we understand that our thinking really has incredible power to affect us physically, but also our surroundings. So that's sort of the quantum mechanics. So again, we've got neuroscience, we've got psychology, we've got quantum mechanics, getting into physics there. And then we can talk about emotional awareness, or emotional awareness. So emotional awareness is another piece of, it's sort of wrapped throughout. But one of the things we do when we do our worksheet is I'm going to write emotional awareness up here. Emotional awareness. One of the things we talk about when we do our worksheets, we make it clear we want you to put down what emotion do you have connected to the false belief. Okay, we want people to know, and the reason we do this, we realize that we're emotional beings, and we tell people later, look, you're going to still get upset about things, and that's part of being a human being, and it's okay that you're going to get upset about things. You can allow yourself to get upset about things, and you need to actually honor that piece of yourself. Something we don't necessarily talk about in the weekend, but this honoring your emotional self is also honoring your inner child, okay? Because that's where you're, psychologically speaking, we're kind of dipping over to psychology a little bit. That's where your emotional self exists, is in that inner child, okay? And so when you honor your emotional self, in other words, yes, I do feel angry, I feel sad, I feel disappointed, I feel joy, I feel love, you're honoring your inner child, okay? And that's incredibly important. And then it also can help point us to the false belief, the emotion. In other words, if I know, by identifying the weekend, that my false belief is I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy, or I'm worthless, or I'm not lovable, whatever the false belief is, and I get an understanding of what the emotion is that's connected to that. So when my not lovable comes up, I feel sad. This helps me in my consciousness process, in the sense that here I am, my conscious and my subconscious mind, and when I tap into the emotion, I know that oftentimes when I'm feeling sad, and especially when the sadness continues, when it lingers for a while, when the sadness lingers, then I'm probably getting in touch with some false belief. And if I know that my sadness is connected with my I'm not lovable belief, I can make that a conscious process and say, so what is it in this moment that's making me feel this way? You know, what thought process is going on for me that's causing me to feel this way? And we get in touch with the fact that it's an I'm not lovable belief. And we can look at sort of what's pushing that button for me, okay? But the emotional piece is so incredibly important, again, because it helps honor the inner child, but also it points us to the false belief, so that we can make the false belief, bring it from the subconscious mind into the conscious mind. And again, that's about raising your level of consciousness, right? That's what we sort of talk about with metacognition. A lot of these other things are about that. So we have sort of those four concepts weaved throughout the weekend, okay, throughout the presentation, throughout the information. And for me, this all points to the bigger concept of personal responsibility. This is where we come to the responsibility ladder. We all miss Bruce. I'm not sure what he's up to, but he's the author of the Responsibility Ladder, and it's a phenomenal concept. Personal responsibility. I think all of this is pointing us in this direction, because when we're caught up in not understanding what's going on in my brain, then it's like a freight train taking over my life. In other words, my thinking is just headed in one direction, and it's getting tied into my neurological process, and it is literally like a freight train. I can't stop it. I can't get in the way. There's no Superman to stand in front of it and stop that freight train. It is just on its way, and it's almost impossible to stop, until I start to recognize that, wait a minute, I can take some responsibility for what I'm thinking and shift what's going on with that freight train. I can send it in a different direction. I can slow it down. I can even stop it if necessary, okay? So that's, again, taking personal responsibility for my neurological, my synapses and my wiring in my brain. And then psychology, the psychology piece also points us to personal responsibility. We're talking about self-talk. We're talking about metacognition. Why am I having the thoughts that I'm having? The reality check, your story, victim land. All of these are about personal responsibility, okay? Then we step over to this side in quantum mechanics. Again, this is sort of like the brain piece, the neurological piece. Understanding what exactly I'm doing, how powerful my brain is, how powerful my mind is, how powerful my thinking is, and how much it affects my life, is, again, taking personal responsibility. That's where all of this points, is towards this piece of personal responsibility. And then we go to emotional awareness. And again, when we are uncomfortable, remember in the weekend we talk about the fact that we're wired to avoid pain, right? And so when I feel pain, which is any emotion that is not peace, love, and joy, I have a tendency to go to that pain and then back off from it and not want to experience it. And so therefore, I'm not honoring my emotional self, okay? I'm avoiding it, I'm in denial about it, I don't want to feel it because it's painful, okay? And therefore that stays in my subconscious process, that stays in my subconscious mind down there, because I'm not willing to go to it, I'm not willing to honor it, I'm not willing to look at it. This is why it's okay to not be okay. It's okay not to be, you got to get okay with not being okay, all right? And in this way, you can see how that's taking personal responsibility. I have an emotional state that is occurring, and I'm going to own the fact that I'm having that emotional state. I'm going to take responsibility for how I'm feeling, and then I'm going to understand why I'm feeling that way, and possibly make some different choices about how I'm handling things, how I'm thinking about things to sort of possibly shift that emotional state. But all of these things work together to bring us to this possibility of personal responsibility, to be able to move forward with things. So that's the first part of what I wanted to say. Any questions about that, or anything? I sort of put this together like just a half hour ago, thinking about what we could do with this, having listened to Joe Dispenza. Anything that I'm forgetting in terms of a process? I feel like we've got neuroscience, psychology, we've got quantum mechanics, we've got emotional awareness. Any other processes that you can think of that we haven't sort of folded into the weekend that I'm not recognizing? I think I addressed it. Go ahead, Mary Lou.
Esther Hicks, or Abraham, says that when you get triggered, you have 17 seconds to realize that and to change your mind about that or put different thoughts in. And after 17 seconds, there's no stopping. You're just on that train you're talking about.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. So she's saying after 17 seconds it's over, or I'm assuming 17 seconds, after 17 seconds, you can still make a change, but it's harder?
Yeah, it's almost impossible. I mean, the mind is just going to run with it.
Yeah, wow, that's a powerful image, 17 seconds, right? Yeah, and one of the other things that we talk about is the emotional chemicals that we describe. I sort of didn't talk about this in this process, is and it's related to the neuroscience piece, is this idea that we have those emotional chemicals. And remember, in 90 seconds, so we have a couple of numbers here, 90 seconds, those emotional chemicals burn out. Those emotional chemicals, we describe them in the weekend, they dock on your cells in your system. They burn out in 90 seconds. So if I'm still having a feeling beyond 90 seconds, sounds like this 17-second thing is happening, right? Like I haven't caught it in the first 17 seconds, so it's still going on for a while. Okay.
Yeah.
But remember, those neurons, those emotional chemicals burn out in 90 seconds. So if I'm experiencing an emotional state for longer than 90 seconds, I'm reinforcing it with my thinking. Yeah, so that's great. 17 seconds, or that freight train just keeps going on down the road. Yep. Other thoughts about this, you guys? Other things from the weekend? I guess the other piece that we do is, the other piece that we offer is connection. We do that through our mentorship, right? The mentors are helping out, so we're connecting with people in that sense. But also connection. The other connection that occurs in this process is a common framework. And that common framework is inner directed and outer directed. So common framework, inner directed, outer directed. So most people are spending their time being outer directed, and that's it looks like a very uncommon framework, in the sense that everybody feels like, you know, this person makes me mad, and that person makes you mad, and this weather makes you mad, and this weather makes that person upset, and this event upsets you, and that event upsets me. So it's very disjointed and not common at all. The way we describe it on Friday night creates a common framework for the fact that we're all similar. The way we operate in these four arenas and every other thing that we describe is very similar. We're common. We're normal. We're all similar in the way we process stuff, and so we're creating a connection between all of us. We start to realize that, look, that person that I hate at work has this same process going on for them. They have the same subconscious kind of stuff happening for them, and they're probably unaware of the fact that that's happening. That creates a real connection with, you know, what we call our villains. I mean, it creates a connection with everybody, but it also creates a connection with our villains if we can understand, hey, this is a common network of processes that go on for everybody. So we don't emphasize that in the weekend, but I think that's a huge piece of this process is that people start to see the commonality among one another, and you can have a lot more empathy under those circumstances. Okay. And that's aside from the connection that we create with the mentors. And I would imagine that, you know, if somebody has a real connection with their mentor through the weekend. They go through this process, work on all this stuff for themselves, and feel real connection with their mentor, real connection with the information. And they also, the other connection that we're creating is connection with self. Because I think that when people are outer directed, they are disconnected from themselves. And think about that for a minute. When you're outer directed, you're blaming stuff outside of you for your emotional state, for how you're showing up in the moment. You're disconnected from the reality of the way things work. You're disconnected from your true self. And how dysfunctional and dis-ease creating is that? Like, and if you guys really think about that, when someone's living a life in the matrix and they're being outer directed, just how disconnected they are from all of these truths about themselves. These are the realities of the way things work, and most people have no idea that these things are even happening for them. So they're totally disconnected from the reality of who they are and how they operate in the world. It's got to be a very sad, hopeless situation, or seems to feel hopeless. I would imagine a lot of people in that state, and a lot of people in the weekend would describe it as hopeless. When I'm totally disconnected from the reality of the way I work and an understanding of that process, I mean, that's a hopeless place to be. That's the story we tell where you're looking for the keys in the wrong place. When I'm being outer directed, I'm trying to get the keys to the kingdom, and I'm looking in the wrong place. And that's incredibly frustrating, incredibly saddening, incredibly difficult, unless you get the information on how to handle that and understand it so that you can make a different choice. Does that make sense? All that? Neville, does that make sense?
Sure.
Can you give me a more enthusiastic? Yes, Chris, that makes great
Yes,
sense.
Chris. I got it.
All right.
Thank you. Hallelujah.
Maurice, how about you? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I just, I don't know. I just think that, the unawareness that people walk around with, I don't know. I try and keep really in my mind it and, to stay more focused that way, but, not always, don't always manage to.
Yeah, well, I mean, none of us are perfect at this process, right? Like, we still become outer directed at moments. Sometimes the freight
Right.
train takes off and those 17 seconds go, and it's a couple hours, maybe a couple days before we get off the train and realize what really is happening. So that happens, and so we need to be gentle with ourselves. We need to be understanding of ourselves. We need to be okay with the fact that I'm not okay. And even if it goes on for a few days and we catch ourselves, like, be okay with the fact that you were in that state. That's all right, because that was also those 17 seconds. That freight train, that emotional freight train, is your inner child taken off with the keys to the kingdom. And so when you finally catch that inner child, you want to be gentle with him or her and acknowledge his or her state, and supportive of what's going on for them, and the fact that, hey, I'm the adult, and you know what? I let that freight train get out of control. So let's honor how you're feeling, and honor what upsets you, and honor some of those kind of things, and get this freight train slowed down and headed in a different direction. So that's it's not an issue at all. The fact that we get into the matrix sometimes. We hope that it happens less and less often. Maurice, can you say that you get in the matrix less often than you used to?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when we were in that meditation class, this thought that he put out there one night just keeps coming back to me over and over again, that who we are is awareness, And the awareness that we are is like our connection to the greater awareness. And awareness doesn't need anything to be other than it is.
Mm,
And so every time I start like thinking, you know, I want to be upset or so, it's like, I think that when he said that, that's when I realized why I think it's A Course in Miracles says there's no, you don't really need forgiveness. Because if everything just has to be the way it is or was, then there's really no need to forgive anything because that's just the way it was.
yeah, so what word is that? When you're okay with the way things are.
I just have peace, I guess.
What's acceptance,
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
right?
okay,
I'm
yeah.
accepting the way things are. I'm okay with the way things are. And that's a form of forgiveness, is being okay with
Right, it's-
the way things are. And of course, we get into that extensively in the weekend, especially with respect to the reality check, where we talk about being okay with however somebody's showing up, however the situation is. I'm okay with that. So that's a form of forgiveness. So yeah, that's a great point. I wanted to bring this back for a second. I hate to erase any of this. I'm gonna take off this bottom part and go back to the initial diagram that we showed, and two points on the far right hand side of that diagram. One was self-realization, and the other one was, I'm drawing a blank on what was above self-realization. Hang on a second, I'll tell you. What's hidden? Oh, there it is. Self-empowerment and self-realization are the two that they have. Self-empowerment and self-realization. So self-realization, self-empowerment. And so you can see that power is in there, self-empowerment. And we talk about this being your power, and the ultimate power that you have in this process of that they're describing on that chart, which is self-empowerment, is to me the true power that we get back to ourselves is the power of choice. We have the choice of what we want to do, how we want to work our brain. We have this choice of how we think. We have the choice in terms of the effects that we have on the world around us. We have a choice about how we handle our emotional awareness. So self-empowerment to me is recognizing again the choices that I have in life. And this is lower on the ladder, but then, and I think, and again, I think most people who are earnestly working the out of the matrix process are somewhere in the self-empowerment, self-realization range, okay? And they even overlap a little bit on that chart. But self-realization to me is, again, becoming a realized self is being in touch with my subconscious mind and my conscious mind, not just my conscious mind. Self-realized, I'm realizing all these things and understanding all these things about myself that have seemed to be hidden, okay? So to me, that's self-realization. I'm realizing exactly who I am, which then lends itself to limitless. Because we start the weekend telling you that you are limitless, which sounds outrageous. But when you start to put all these different pieces together and recognize just how powerful a being I am, that I can wire my brain, that I can choose how I think, that I can draw different people, things, and experiences into my life, that I have these incredibly powerful emotions that drive things for me. We started getting in touch with just how limitless we are. And again, at first I become self-empowered and see the power of choice in my life to affect all these things. And again, the more I empty out my subconscious mind, the more self-realized I become. And as the more self-realized I become, everything, it all becomes unified. This whole process of conscious, subconscious becomes unified. I have realization of who I truly am. And I believe that leads us to this limitless idea, which, you know, we're going to talk about spiritual for just 2 seconds. We don't talk about that a lot on the weekend. We don't use those words because we're trying to keep it somewhat secular. But what we're really pointing people towards is their spiritual reality, which is a limitless being. And that's the process that you're working on when you're raising your level of consciousness. Raising your level of consciousness, bringing more of yourself from the subconscious into the conscious mind. Okay. So comments, thoughts, questions about any of that? So that's kind of what I had for tonight. That was quick and easy. 35 minutes in, but again, I was thinking about the different sciences that we lean on to teach what we teach, and how that points us towards our idea of personal responsibility, the connections it creates with ourselves, with our true self. All of this works to help us understand who we truly are, self-realization. Again, this all gives us a framework and an idea of what exactly we are and how we operate. So we're making a connection with our true self, self-realization, right? Self-empowerment and self-realization. That's the process that we're working. I want to bring up the chart again for you guys to see, so we can sort of honor what we're talking about. There she be. So there's that self-empowerment, self-realization. You can sort of see on the far left-hand side, he's got the numbers, and then he's got courage at 200, neutrality. So neutrality looks like satisfactory, trust, enabling, release. I trust the universe to help me. 60% of the world lives at that level. Is that what he's saying? Oh, no, that's the rate of happiness. 60% is the rate of happiness. 18% of the world lives there. I trust the universe to help me. And we move up to 310, willingness. I'm hopeful, optimism, inspiring, intention, life is good. 68% happiness. I'm not sure how they get that, but it's an interesting figure. 350, acceptance, harmonious, forgiveness, merciful, transcendence. People are inherently good. We move up to reason, meaningful, understanding, wise, abstraction. Everyone is capable of learning. And then we go up to 500. This is where we start to get into the self-realization. Self-realization starts, looks like they're with the reason part, that they overlap a little bit. And it's interesting, self-realization sort of overlaps between self-empowerment and spiritual. But it looks to start there around reason. So we go to love, and it's benign, reverence for life, loving, revelation, we all share in happiness. And joy is above that at 540, complete, serenity, one, transfiguration, your joy is my joy. And again, this is also referred to as the razor's edge, right? The farther you go out, the fewer people there are that are involved in the process. But I still feel like most people who are earnestly working out of the matrix are in that self-empowerment range, self-realization type range, okay? But you can sort of think about everything that we talked about tonight. I'm going to stop the screen share. You can sort of see how all of this works together to affect that self-empowerment and self-realization piece that is reflected on that chart. And then above that, and what's the one above it? Oh, I cannot minimize when you are recording the meeting. All right. Won't minimize. Yes, and then it's just spiritual above that. So self-empowerment, self-realization, and then it's pointing us toward what we talk about on Friday night, which is our limitless reality, our spiritual reality. All right. So questions about that, you guys? Questions, comments, any ahas about what we're talking about? We're getting quite a few views. We're getting 15, 20 views of the video every week, and so I think a lot of people are choosing just to watch the video rather than plug it in with us on Thursday night. So I at least feel like we're having small numbers in terms of people joining us live, but that's okay because people are watching the video, and I'm getting some feedback from folks that they're appreciating the videos. And I wanted to go back to sort of some basic stuff. I think it's important to always kind of go back to our base information and understand it in different ways and see it in different lights so that we can reinforce the information. And maybe when you see it in a different light and in a different way, it might strike you differently. Okay, and I love Mary Lou's comment about the 17 seconds, relating to that freight train that is our neural connections and our neural process. All right. All right, I'm going to end the recording.